They mocked the homeless man outside their office, until he walked in as their new CEO. The grand boardroom of Veritas Holdings, a citadel of global finance, hummed with an unusual, almost palpable tension. Polished mahogany gleamed under the opulent chandeliers, reflecting the anxious faces of the company's most senior executives. Each polished surface seemed to magnify the unspoken anticipation that gripped the room. Alastair Finch, head of acquisitions, stood at the head of the colossal table, a man who believed himself perfectly positioned. His impeccably tailored suit, a symphony in charcoal gray, was a testament not just to his wealth, but to his perceived status, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a silent declaration of impending victory. Beside him, Serafina Vance, his assistant and confidant, meticulously adjusted her designer scarf, a subtle preening gesture. Her eyes, usually cool and calculating, darted between the imposing oak door and the expectant faces around the table, a predatory gleam in their depths. The air was thick, not just with anticipation, but with the heavy scent of expensive cologne and unspoken ambitions, for today was the day the future of Veritas Holdings was to be announced. The reclusive founder, Elias Thorne, was expected to name his successor, and Alastair, cloaked in his unshakable arrogance, was utterly certain it would be him. His mind already conjured images of the company's colossal wealth, soon to be his to command. The heavy oak doors creaked open, a sound that usually heralded the arrival of gravitas. A hush, deep and immediate, fell over the room. All eyes snapped to the entrance, their expressions poised for reverence, for the sight of the formidable Elias Thorne they knew. But the collective gasp that followed was not one of respect, but of bewildered disgust, a wave of repulsion that visibly rippled through the assembled executives. Shuffling hesitantly into the room was not the titan they expected, but a figure that seemed to have materialized from the grimy alleyways of the city, a stark, jarring contrast to the pristine environment. His clothes were tattered, stained with what looked like days, perhaps weeks, of accumulated grime and neglect. A matted, unkempt beard, thick with dirt, framed a gaunt face, and his eyes, though sharp and piercing even through the haze of exhaustion, were sunken, framed by dark circles that spoke of endless, sleepless nights. A faint, acrid smell, a mixture of unwashed humanity and stale dampness, seemed to emanate from him, causing several executives to subtly wrinkle their noses, a few even leaning back in their chairs as if to escape the perceived contamination. Alastair's smug smile, moments before so confidently plastered across his face, faltered, then dissolved completely, replaced by a scowl of utter, visceral contempt. He recoiled slightly, as if touched by something unclean. "What in the blazes is this?" he hissed, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a razor. His eyes blazed with fury, an affront to his meticulously planned morning. "Security! Get this vagrant out of here. Now! This is a private meeting." Serafina, ever his echo, ever attuned to his displeasure, clutched her expensive handbag closer to her chest, her face contorted in a mask of repulsion, her lips curling. "Oh, for goodness sake, Alastair, the smell," she dramatically exclaimed, fanning herself with a slender, bejeweled hand, as if warding off a noxious gas. "He's tainting the air. How did he even get past the lobby? The security here is utterly incompetent." Her voice was shrill, designed for maximum effect. The vagrant stood before them, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a knowing glint in his tired eyes that few, if any, could decipher. His gaze, slow and deliberate, surveyed the room, lingering on the appalled faces of Alastair and Serafina. A profound sense of irony washed over him, a deep, resonant satisfaction that resonated in his very bones. The game, he mused, was finally over. The masks, so carefully constructed and worn for so long, were about to fall, and the true faces of Veritas Holdings, unvarnished by pretense, would be laid bare. Elias Thorne, for it was indeed he, allowed a moment of silence to stretch, thick and uncomfortable, letting the full weight of their disdain settle upon him, an almost physical pressure. He had orchestrated this grand test, this elaborate charade, with painstaking precision, all to expose the very core of their character. Their reaction, though utterly predictable, still stung with the bitterness of betrayal, a quiet sorrow for what Veritas Holdings, and indeed his own life, had become. This was the moment of reckoning, the culmination of months of carefully laid plans, and the beginning of a new, unforeseen chapter for Veritas Holdings. He felt a deep, weary resolve settle within him. Elias Thorne, at 72, possessed a fortune that could buy small nations, an empire of numbers and influence that spanned continents. Yet, true contentment, that elusive whisper of peace, had eluded him for decades. He was the sole architect of Veritas Holdings, a global financial empire built on shrewd decisions, audacious risks, and an almost preternatural understanding of markets. Every towering skyscraper, every intricate trading algorithm, every lucrative acquisition bore his signature, his genius. Yet, the higher his empire soared, the deeper the chasm of loneliness and disillusionment grew within him. He had achieved everything material wealth could offer, only to discover it was a gilded cage, trapping him in a world devoid of genuine human connection, a world of transactional relationships and superficial pleasantries. He had spent a lifetime accumulating, only to find himself utterly empty. His beloved wife, Eleanor, had passed away decades ago, leaving him with a void that no amount of success, no billion-dollar deal, could ever fill. Her quiet grace, her unwavering kindness, were memories that haunted him, a stark contrast to the emptiness of his present. His children, grown and comfortable, had long since ceased to see him as a father, a source of comfort or wisdom. Instead, they viewed him as a bottomless wellspring of funds, a walking ATM, a convenient resource to be tapped. Their calls, once eagerly anticipated, were now punctuated by thinly veiled requests for investments in their dubious ventures, for trust funds for grandchildren he barely allowed himself to see, for designer vacations and luxury cars. Their smiles, he observed with a quiet ache in his chest, never quite reached their eyes, always stopping short at the calculating gleam of avarice. He saw it in their hurried goodbyes, their impatience when he spoke of anything other than finances, their superficial concern for his health masked by an insatiable hunger for more. His own son, Julian, had once bluntly asked him why he didn't just retire and enjoy his money, implying that his continued presence at Veritas was merely an obstacle to their own, more immediate, inheritance. His senior management, once chosen for their intellect, their drive, their perceived loyalty, had slowly but surely evolved into a cabal of sycophants and power-hungry opportunists. They lauded his genius in public, their voices oozing with feigned admiration, but behind closed doors, he suspected they were merely circling, like vultures, waiting for him to falter, to make way for their own ascension. Alastair Finch was the epitome of this new breed. Shrewd, certainly, possessing a ruthless ambition that Elias had once, in his youth, admired in himself, Alastair had become consumed by a singular, all-encompassing focus, power. He saw Veritas Holdings not as a legacy to be stewarded, a beacon of ethical finance to be upheld, but as a throne to be seized, a personal kingdom to be plundered. Elias had witnessed Alastair's callous disregard for junior employees, his dismissive attitude towards anyone he deemed beneath him, his blatant disregard for ethics when it served his own advancement. It was a mirror reflecting the very values Elias had come to despise in the cutthroat world he had created. He saw the cold calculation in Alastair's eyes, a chilling echo of his own younger self, but without the tempering of experience or the hard-won lessons of compassion. The final straw had come during a routine board meeting, a year prior. Elias had proposed a new initiative, a genuinely philanthropic venture aimed at sustainable development in impoverished regions, a quiet yearning to give back to a world from which he had taken so much. The idea, born from his quiet yearning to give back, a desperate attempt to find meaning beyond the balance sheet, was met with a chorus of polite but firm rejections. Alastair had been particularly vocal, his voice resonating with false concern, arguing that it would dilute shareholder value and was not aligned with the core business model. He spoke of numbers, of profits, of market perception, never once of human impact or genuine compassion. Elias had seen the glint in Alastair's eyes, not of concern for the company's future, but of a man protecting his future inheritance, his perceived right to Elias's fortune. It was then that the seed of the grand test was planted, a tiny, defiant sprout of an idea in the desolate landscape of his soul. Elias realized with a sickening clarity that his immense wealth had become a distorting lens, blurring the true nature of those around him. People either fawned over him, seeking his favor, their voices honeyed with insincerity, or resented him, coveting his position, their eyes sharp with barely concealed envy. He longed for genuine human connection, for an unbiased glimpse into the hearts of those who claimed to be loyal, those who benefited most from his empire. He needed to see character unvarnished by expectation or greed. He needed to strip away the veneer of his own identity, to become invisible, irrelevant, to truly observe. He needed to become nothing to see who truly was something. The plan was meticulously crafted, with the precision of a complex financial strategy. He secretly established a hidden fund, untraceable to his main assets, for his personal use during the experiment, ensuring his absolute financial independence. He consulted with a discreet team of private investigators to manage logistical necessities from a distance, and renowned makeup artists, ensuring his disguise would be flawless, capable of withstanding weeks of wear. He spent weeks studying the mannerisms of the truly destitute, learning to shuffle, to avert his gaze, to cultivate the subtle signs of long-term neglect, the slow blink, the defensive hunch, the way hunger etched itself onto a face. He chose the location carefully, directly outside the main entrance of Veritas Holdings, the very heart of his empire, a symbolic staging ground. He wanted to see how his own people, those who benefited most from his wealth, those who claimed to serve his vision, would treat someone who had nothing. He wanted to observe the stark contrast between those who would trample over the vulnerable for personal gain and those, if any existed, who would extend a hand of genuine kindness. The test would be the ultimate determinant of his successor, and indeed, the very soul of Veritas Holdings. He knew it would be a painful journey, confirming his darkest fears about humanity, but he was resolute. He had to know the truth, no matter how bitter. The integrity of his legacy depended on it. The transformation was profound, almost horrifying in its completeness. Elias Thorne, the titan of industry, meticulously shed his identity, layer by layer, until the man he once was vanished beneath a carefully constructed facade. His bespoke suits, once his second skin, were replaced by layers of threadbare, ill-fitting clothes sourced from charity shops, deliberately stained and worn, smelling faintly of stale disinfectant. His immaculately groomed silver hair was matted, streaked with artificial gray and dirt, peeking out from under a grimy woolen hat pulled low over his eyes. A prosthetic beard, expertly applied to mimic weeks of unkempt growth, obscured his aristocratic jawline, while subtle makeup dulled his skin, adding a ghastly pallor of chronic fatigue and malnourishment. He practiced the shuffle of an old man whose body ached with every movement, the vacant stare of someone long forgotten by society, the hunched posture that spoke of endless nights on cold pavement, exposed to the elements. Elias had even subtly altered his voice, making it raspy and a little weak, a stark contrast to his usual authoritative baritone, to complete the illusion. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized the stranger staring back, a powerful testament to the skill of his team and the depth of his commitment. His chosen spot was strategically perfect, a sheltered alcove just off the main entrance of Veritas Holdings, where he could observe the steady stream of employees entering and exiting, yet remain largely ignored by the bustling city beyond. It was a liminal space, a perfect vantage point for invisibility. The first few days were a blur of discomfort and unfamiliarity, a brutal baptism into a world he had only ever seen from afar. The cold seeped into his bones, a relentless ache that no amount of layering seemed to alleviate. The hard ground, despite the thin, scavenged cardboard he laid down, was unforgiving against his aging joints. The constant noise of the city, once a distant, manageable hum from his penthouse office, now assaulted his senses, the screech of brakes, the blare of horns, the cacophony of hurried footsteps. But more jarring than the physical discomfort was the profound, soul-crushing shift in how he was perceived, or rather, not perceived. He was utterly invisible. People walked past him as if he were part of the urban landscape, an inconvenient obstacle to be skirted. The occasional glance was usually one of disdain, a hurried look away, or a subtle pull of a jacket closer, as if his very presence was contagious, a disease to be avoided. The wealthy, the successful, they averted their eyes, unwilling to acknowledge the stark reflection of what society could become. Alastair Finch and Serafina Vance were among the first of his targets to cross his path, their regular arrival a predictable ritual. On his third day, huddled against the relentless chill, Elias watched as Alastair emerged from a sleek, luxury car, its polished chrome gleaming. Serafina trailed behind him, both radiating an aura of self-importance that seemed to expand to fill the entire sidewalk. As they neared his alcove, Serafina paused, her gaze, sharp and assessing, falling upon Elias. Her perfectly manicured nose wrinkled in open disgust, a theatrical expression that Elias found particularly infuriating. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Alastair, look at this," she exclaimed, her voice shrill and carrying, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Another one. Right outside the main entrance. It's truly a blight on the corporate image. How are we supposed to impress clients when we have this greeting them?" She made a sweeping gesture of dismissal towards Elias. Alastair, his eyes fixed on his smartphone, barely glanced up, his attention consumed by the latest market data. "Don't bother with it, Serafina," he muttered, dismissing Elias with a casual wave of his hand as if swatting an annoying fly. "Security will handle it. They're probably waiting for a handout anyway. Just ignore them. They thrive on attention." He stepped over Elias's outstretched leg, barely acknowledging his existence, his gaze already fixed on the gleaming glass doors of Veritas, his world shrinking to the confines of his screens and ambitions. Elias felt a cold pang in his chest, not of anger, but of a quiet, weary confirmation. Their contempt was so effortless, so ingrained, so utterly devoid of thought or reflection. It was a natural reflex, a conditioned response to anyone deemed beneath them. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern solidified, a depressing rhythm of indifference. Each morning, as Elias settled into his makeshift bed, stiff and aching, he would watch the procession of well-dressed employees, a parade of success oblivious to the human cost of their world. Most hurried past, eyes averted, shoulders hunched in a desperate attempt to appear busy and important, their expressions carefully neutral to avoid any perceived engagement. Some would cast him a brief, pitying glance, a fleeting moment of discomfort, but it was almost always followed by a swift retreat, as if the mere act of acknowledging his existence was too taxing, too burdensome. A few, particularly younger, bolder employees, would sometimes mock him under their breath, or even openly snicker, their faces twisted in cruel amusement. Elias overheard fragments of their conversations. "Why doesn't he just get a job? Probably spent all his money on booze. Just another drain on society." Their words, though directed at the homeless man, cut through Elias like a knife, revealing the callousness of a generation raised on privilege and a profound lack of genuine empathy. He saw the future of his company in their eyes, and it chilled him to the bone. Alastair and Serafina, however, were consistently the worst offenders. They seemed to take a perverse pleasure in expressing their disdain, almost as if it bolstered their own sense of superiority. One particularly cold morning, as Elias shivered despite his layers, his teeth chattering uncontrollably, Alastair stormed out of the building, a furious expression on his face, clearly annoyed by some trivial office matter. He spotted Elias and stopped dead. "You," he bellowed, pointing an accusatory finger, his voice echoing in the crisp morning air. "Are you still here? I told security to remove you. You're an eyesore. A disgrace. You're making our prestigious company look bad. Get out of here, before I call the police and have you forcibly removed." He even nudged Elias's tattered blanket with the toe of his expensive shoe, a blatant act of aggression, a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt. Serafina, standing a polite distance away, nodded vigorously, her expression one of sanctimonious agreement. "He truly is a public nuisance, Alastair," she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, but her eyes hard. And the stench, it's simply unbearable. Elias met Alistair's gaze, his own eyes holding a depth of knowledge that the executive completely missed, blinded by his own self-importance and prejudice. He simply offered a quiet, raspy cough, confirming Alistair's prejudiced assumptions, playing the part perfectly. He felt a deep, profound sadness for the man Alistair had become. Then there was Marius. Marius, the longtime security guard, aged 68, whose uniform was slightly faded, his shoulders a little stooped from years of standing guard, but whose eyes held a warmth that belied his tired frame. Marius was an anomaly, a singular beacon of light in the pervasive darkness of indifference. On Elias's first day, as he feigned sleep, he felt a gentle nudge against his arm. He opened his eyes cautiously to see Marius, his face etched with worry lines and a genuine concern, holding out a steaming paper cup. "Here, old-timer," Marius's voice was soft, slightly gravelly, a comforting rumble. "It's just hot water. It'll help with the chill." Elias nodded, taking the cup, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through him, not just from the liquid, but from the unexpected, unbidden kindness. Marius didn't ask for anything, didn't offer advice, didn't preach, just a simple gesture of human decency. It was a lifeline. A few days later, Marius approached again during his lunch break, a familiar sight with his brown paper bag. He sat down a respectful distance away, not too close as to intrude, but close enough to signal camaraderie. He unwrapped a simple sandwich, the smell of ham and cheese briefly filling the cold air. "You know," Marius began, his voice low, almost a whisper, "it's going to be a cold week. Do you have anywhere warm to go at night? A shelter, maybe?" Elias shook his head, maintaining his persona, the lie heavy on his tongue but necessary for the truth he sought. Marius sighed, a deep, weary sound that spoke of long years and hard living. "Well, stay safe out there. Here, I always pack too much." He offered half of his sandwich, a simple ham and cheese, neatly wrapped in paper. Elias hesitated, then took it, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The sandwich, humble as it was, tasted like the finest meal he had ever consumed, seasoned with genuine compassion, a flavor he had forgotten. These small interactions became a quiet ritual, a source of solace and a focal point for Elias's observations. Almost every day, Marius would seek Elias out during his breaks, or simply on his rounds. Sometimes it was just a nod, a brief moment of eye contact that acknowledged Elias's humanity, a silent message that he was seen, not just ignored. Other times, Marius would bring a small thermos of tea, or a newspaper he had finished reading, folded neatly. One bitter evening, as a biting wind tore through the city, Marius had discreetly left a spare, relatively clean blanket folded near Elias's spot, his quiet act of care a beacon in the cold indifference, a moment Elias would never forget. He would often ask, "Are you doing all right, friend?" Never pressing, never judging, simply offering a quiet, consistent source of kindness that spoke volumes about his character. He even occasionally slipped him a few spare coins, small amounts Marius likely couldn't easily spare, but offered with a gentle, insistent hand. Elias observed Marius closely, with the same analytical precision he applied to market trends, but with a deeper, more personal lens. He noticed the worn patches on Marius's uniform, the way he sometimes rubbed his lower back with a grimace, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself despite his modest position. Marius, too, was clearly a man of humble means, likely struggling with his own financial burdens and the aches of an aging body. Yet, despite his own difficulties, he chose to extend generosity and empathy to a stranger he believed was truly destitute, a silent testament to a heart uncorrupted by the pursuit of wealth. It was a stark, heartbreaking contrast to the avarice and callousness of the executives who strode past them, oblivious to the quiet heroism unfolding before their very eyes. Elias saw Alistair and Seraphina's reactions to Marius's kindness. They would often look on with disdain, shaking their heads, their expressions a mixture of pity and annoyance. Honestly, Marius, Seraphina had once scoffed, loud enough to be heard, "You're too soft. you'll encourage them. They'll never leave if you keep being so charitable. Alistair would simply roll his eyes, muttering about misplaced charity and enabling laziness. Their contempt for Marius's compassion was as evident as their contempt for Elias in his disguise, a clear indication of their own moral decay. They saw kindness as weakness, a flaw to be corrected. During these weeks, Elias's initial cynicism began to deepen regarding his family and his senior leadership, solidifying his darkest fears. But simultaneously, a tiny spark of hope was kindled by Marius, a fragile flame in a desolate landscape. He saw the true colors of his potential successors: greed, arrogance, and a complete lack of empathy. And he saw the true heart of a man like Marius, humble, decent, and compassionate. His decision regarding the future of Veritas Holdings solidified, becoming crystal clear. The company, he realized, needed not just a leader of impeccable financial acumen, but a soul. And that soul would not be found among the ruthless and the self-serving, among those who valued profit above humanity. It would be found in the quiet, unassuming dignity of people like Marius, in the simple, consistent acts of kindness. The test was complete. The observations were damning for some, profoundly revealing for another. The morning of the highly anticipated board meeting dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break within the hallowed halls of Veritas Holdings. Alistair Finch strutted into the boardroom, his chest puffed out with barely contained triumph, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He exchanged knowing glances with Seraphina Vance, who sat at the corner of the table, her pen poised over her notepad, a smug, anticipatory smile playing on her lips. They were both utterly convinced that Elias Thorne, the reclusive founder, would finally name Alistair as his successor, cementing their power and influence for decades to come. The thought filled Seraphina with a thrilling sense of vindication and opportunity. The room was abuzz with hushed conversations, a nervous energy crackling in the air. The other board members, a collection of formidable figures from the financial world, were equally expectant, though a few harbored private doubts about Alistair's suitability for such a crucial role, sensing a certain moral bankruptcy beneath his polished exterior. A large, ornate portrait of a younger, more vibrant Elias Thorne gazed down from the wall, seemingly watching the unfolding drama with an almost melancholic air, a silent observer of the impending reckoning. Precisely at 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a deliberate, echoing creak that reverberated through the tense silence. All heads turned, expecting to see Elias Thorne, perhaps a little more stooped than usual, but certainly in his customary impeccably tailored suit, a picture of corporate power. Instead, a figure stepped through the doorway, causing a collective gasp that rippled through the room like a physical wave. It was Elias Thorne, undeniably, unmistakably, but transformed in a way that defied comprehension. He was no longer the frail, disheveled homeless man who had haunted the building's entrance, nor was he the slightly hunched, aged billionaire they were accustomed to. He stood tall, his posture erect, radiating an immense, almost palpable power, a quiet authority that commanded attention. His silver hair, though still long, was now meticulously groomed, swept back from a face that, while still lined with the wisdom and weariness of age, was clean-shaven, commanding, and utterly resolute. His eyes, clear and piercing, held a chilling intensity that seemed to see into the very souls of those present, stripping away all pretense. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit that seemed to shimmer with quiet authority, a stark, almost defiant contrast to the tattered rags he had worn for months. He was accompanied by a lean, formidable man in a sharp suit, his personal attorney, Mr. Davies, whose presence usually signified matters of extreme gravity, often involving intricate legal battles or vast financial restructuring. Alistair Finch's face, moments before flushed with anticipation, drained of all color, becoming a ghastly white. His jaw dropped, and the smug smile vanished entirely, replaced by an expression of dawning horror, a slow, terrifying realization. Seraphina Vance, her pen clattering uselessly onto the table, stared, her eyes wide with disbelief, her perfectly made-up face contorted in a silent scream. A faint tremor began to run through her. The air in the room became charged, thick with unspoken questions and a rising sense of dread that coiled in the pit of every stomach. They sensed, instinctively, that something monumental, and profoundly terrible for some, was about to unfold. Elias Thorne strode purposefully to the head of the table, his movements precise and unhurried, every step deliberate. He did not sit. Instead, he stood before them, a towering presence, his gaze sweeping across the room, lingering for a moment on each face, assessing, judging, finally settling with chilling precision on Alistair and Seraphina. His voice, when he spoke, was not the weak, raspy mumble they had heard outside, not the voice of a supplicant, but a resonant, powerful baritone that filled the room, imbued with a chilling calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "Good morning, gentlemen, ladies," Elias began, his voice devoid of warmth, echoing slightly in the sudden, cavernous silence. "I apologize for any confusion regarding my appearance today. Some of you, perhaps, were expecting a different entrance." His eyes fixed on Alistair, then Seraphina, a flicker of something akin to contempt, cold and sharp, in their depths. And indeed, a different person entirely. Alistair, finally finding his voice, though it was now a pathetic croak, attempted to stammer out an explanation, a desperate reassertion of control. "Mr. Thorne, sir, what is the meaning of this? We were told you would be naming your successor today." He sounded desperate, his usual arrogance replaced by a frantic scramble for understanding, his mind racing, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle. Seraphina, though pale, managed to blurt out, "Yes, sir. We've been eagerly awaiting your decision." Her voice trembled, a crack in her carefully constructed composure. Elias allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile, one that did not reach his eyes, a grim twist of the lips. "Oh, my decision has been made, Alistair. In fact, it was made over the course of the past few months. You see," he paused, allowing the tension to coil even tighter, a slow, agonizing turn of the screw, "I have been conducting a rather unconventional audit of Veritas Holdings. Not of our financial books, not of our quarterly reports, but of our human capital. Of the very heart and soul of this company." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze hardening as it landed squarely on Alistair, then sweeping to include Seraphina. "For the past 3 months, I have been living on the streets, right outside the main entrance of this very building." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, descending slowly, inevitably. A collective gasp, louder this time, a visceral shock, erupted from the board members, their faces a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. Alistair's face went from pale to ashen, a deathly gray. Seraphina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Elias and Alistair, as if seeking confirmation of the unspeakable, the utterly unbelievable. She felt a cold dread gripping her, tightening its hold. "I have seen," Elias continued, his voice rising, gaining a powerful, accusatory edge that resonated with righteous fury, "how my employees, my senior executives, those who stand to inherit my legacy, treat the most vulnerable among us. I have seen the disdain, the mockery, the open hostility, the sheer, unadulterated cruelty." His eyes bored into Alistair's, then swept to Seraphina's trembling form, accusing, unyielding. "I have heard the insults, the demands to get rid of the blight, the complaints about the stench of a fellow human being. I have felt the sting of your casual contempt, the coldness of your indifference, the utter disregard for a life you deemed worthless." Alistair opened his mouth, but no sound emerged, only a dry, desperate gasp. Seraphina whimpered, a small, strangled sound. The blood had drained completely from their faces, replaced by a ghastly pallor of utter comprehension and abject terror. They finally understood. The homeless man, the vagrant they had repeatedly abused, dismissed, and openly mocked, was Elias Thorne himself. Their contempt, their cruelty, their utter lack of basic human decency had been directed at the very man who held their careers, their ambitions, and their futures in his hands. The mask had truly fallen, not just from Elias, but from their own vile characters, exposed for all to see, undeniable, unforgivable. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the shallow, panicked breathing of Alistair and Seraphina, as their world, built on a shaky foundation of hypocrisy and avarice, began to crumble into dust around them. The revelation hung in the air, a poisonous gas stifling the last vestiges of dignity from Alistair Finch and Seraphina Vance. Elias Thorne, his voice now a cold, unyielding steel, continued his indictment, his words precise and devastating. Alistair, he stated, his gaze unblinking, unwavering, you, who believed yourself my natural successor, proved yourself utterly unfit. Your ambition is boundless, certainly, but your empathy is non-existent. You saw a human being in distress, a fellow soul struggling, and chose to stomp on him, to humiliate him, to demand his removal as if he were refuse, an inconvenient stain on your pristine world. You, and your equally opportunistic associate, Seraphina, showed no shred of compassion. He paused, allowing the full weight of his words to crush them, watching their faces crumple. Veritas Holdings was founded on principles of integrity and human value, not merely profit. Your actions have demonstrated a profound betrayal of those very principles, a rot at the core of your being. Alistair, finally finding his voice, though it was now a pathetic croak, raspy with fear, attempted to stammer out a desperate explanation. Sir, Mr. Thorne. I didn't know. I swear. I thought he was just a vagrant. A public nuisance. If I had known, I would have offered him anything. Money. Assistance. A job. His words were hollow, ringing with transparent insincerity, further cementing Elias's judgment. His face was a mask of pleading, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic attempt to salvage his shattered career, his entire future. Seraphina, her face mottled with shame and fear, her mascara running in black rivulets, began to weep silently, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into a heap of designer-clad misery. Your ignorance, Alistair, Elias retorted, his voice unwavering, devoid of any sympathy, is not an excuse for your inhumanity. It is precisely because you believed him to be a mere vagrant that your true character was revealed. You had no empathy for a stranger, no respect for a fellow human being you deemed beneath you. That is unforgivable. He turned to Mr. Davies, his attorney, who stood silently, a picture of efficient professionalism. Mr. Davies, please inform Mr. Finch and Ms. Vance that their employment with Veritas Holdings is terminated, effective immediately. Their access to all company assets, accounts, and premises is to be revoked at once. Furthermore, I will personally ensure that their actions, and the reasons for their dismissal, become widely known within our industry. Let their names serve as a cautionary tale, a stark example of what happens when ambition eclipses basic decency. The words struck Alistair and Seraphina like physical blows, a crushing weight of finality. Alistair stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table for support, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization that not only his career but his entire reputation, his social standing, and his future were being utterly obliterated. Seraphina let out a small, strangled sob, her carefully curated world dissolving into nothingness, her dreams of power and wealth turning to ash. They were summarily escorted out by discreetly waiting security personnel, their protests and pleas falling on deaf ears, their faces a tableau of utter ruin. The remaining board members watched in stunned silence, a chilling lesson having been delivered with brutal efficiency, a stark reminder of the true power of their founder. They exchanged nervous glances, understanding that their own conduct might now be under silent scrutiny. With Alistair and Seraphina gone, the air in the boardroom, though still tense, felt lighter. Elias took a deep breath, turning his attention to another, far more pleasant matter. He left the boardroom, passing through the opulent marble lobby, his gaze scanning the familiar faces of the security team, who now looked at him with a mixture of awe and trepidation. He spotted Marius, standing near the main entrance, looking bewildered by the morning's commotion, a quiet figure in the chaos. Marius's eyes met Elias's, and a flicker of recognition, a hesitant uncertainty, crossed the old guard's face. He had seen the homeless man arrive just minutes before, clean-shaven and impeccably dressed, and the resemblance, now seen so clearly, was unmistakable. Elias approached Marius, a gentle smile softening his features, a profound warmth in his eyes, very different from the cold steel he had just used in the boardroom. "Marius," he said, his voice quiet, sincere. "May I have a word with you, in private?" Marius, still processing the profound shock, nodded slowly, his movements stiff, leading Elias to a quiet alcove near the staff entrance, a place where they had shared so many simple moments. "Sir," Marius began, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and trepidation, his mind reeling. I thought, you were." Elias chuckled softly, a genuine, heartfelt sound. "Indeed, Marius, I was. For the past 3 months, I have been the old man you so generously looked after. The one you shared your sandwich with, offered your tea to, and showed such consistent kindness, day after day, without expectation of reward." He looked at Marius, his eyes filled with profound gratitude and respect. "You, Marius, were the only one who saw a human being when everyone else saw a nuisance, an inconvenience. You demonstrated true character, true empathy, when those I trusted most, those who stood to gain everything, showed only contempt and indifference." Marius stood speechless, tears welling in his tired eyes, blurring his vision. The man he had offered simple kindness to, believing him to be truly down on his luck, a fellow struggling soul, was the legendary Elias Thorne, the founder of Veritas Holdings, the titan of finance. The sheer enormity of the revelation was overwhelming, a staggering weight of grace. He felt a lump form in his throat, choked with emotion. "Marius," Elias continued, his voice firm but gentle, "your acts of kindness, however small they seemed, were monumental to me. They were a beacon in the darkness, a confirmation that true decency still exists in this often cold world. And for that, I intend to reward you fittingly, not as a repayment, but as an acknowledgement of your true worth." Marius, ever humble, ever self-effacing, tried to protest, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir, I didn't do it for a reward. I just tried to help a fellow man. It was simply the right thing to do." Elias placed a hand on Marius's shoulder, a gesture of genuine connection. "And that, Marius, is precisely why you deserve it. From this day forward, you are no longer a security guard. You are to be appointed the head of employee welfare, a newly created, senior position within Veritas Holdings. Your role will be to ensure that every employee, from the newest intern to the most senior executive, is treated with dignity, respect, and compassion. You will be the moral compass of this company, Marius, its guiding heart." Marius stared, his mouth agape, his mind struggling to process the incredible news. A senior executive position? He, a humble security guard, whose greatest ambition was a comfortable retirement. It was beyond his wildest dreams. Furthermore, Elias added, a warm glint in his eye, watching Marius's stunned expression, "I have arranged for a comfortable, fully furnished home to be purchased in your name, mortgage-free. It has a small garden, Marius, I know you enjoy gardening. And a trust fund has been established for your financial security, ensuring you will live comfortably for the rest of your days, free from any worries. Your pension will be quadrupled, and your family will be taken care of, for generations if necessary." Marius collapsed onto a nearby bench, his legs suddenly too weak to hold him, tears now streaming freely down his face, silent sobs racking his frame. It was more than he could have ever dreamed of, more than he had ever dared to hope for. A lifetime of quiet struggles, of making do, of small acts of kindness given without expectation, had culminated in this moment of profound, life-altering generosity. He wasn't just being rewarded, he was being seen, truly seen, for the goodness of his heart, for the silent integrity of his character. The quiet, unassuming security guard had, in his simple acts of compassion, inherited a legacy far more valuable than any corporate title or vast fortune, the genuine respect and gratitude of Elias Thorne, and a future of unimaginable comfort and dignity. 6 months later, Veritas Holdings was a changed company, transformed from its very core. The initial shockwaves of Elias Thorne's revelation had subsided, replaced by a quiet, yet profound, shift in corporate culture that permeated every level. The ruthless, cutthroat atmosphere that Alastair Finch had fostered was gone, replaced by an emphasis on ethical conduct, employee well-being, and genuine respect for every individual, regardless of their position. Elias, though still the founder and guiding presence, had gracefully stepped back from daily operations, delegating more to a new leadership team, carefully selected not just for their competence and sharp minds, but for their proven character and empathy. He remained an active, guiding presence, but one focused on the company's moral compass rather than just its bottom line, ensuring the new values took root. Marius, the new head of employee welfare, had blossomed in his role, radiating a quiet confidence he had never possessed before. He still wore his security uniform sometimes, a symbolic gesture of his humble origins, a reminder of where he came from, but now it was impeccably pressed, and his posture was straighter, imbued with a newfound authority and purpose. His office, once Alastair's opulent, cold domain, was now a welcoming space, often filled with employees seeking his quiet counsel, a listening ear, or simply a moment of calm. He initiated programs for mental health support, flexible working hours, and even a small fund for employees facing unexpected hardships, all ideas born from his own experiences and his innate compassion for others. He even started a small community garden on the company premises, a tranquil oasis where employees could connect, relax, and whose produce was regularly donated to local shelters, a beautiful cycle of giving. He was a living embodiment of the new values Elias Thorne sought to instill, a beacon of kindness in the heart of the corporate world. Marius's new home was indeed perfect, with a small, thriving garden where he spent his mornings, finding immense joy in nurturing life, just as he had nurtured kindness in the heart of Elias. He often volunteered at local soup kitchens, always remembering the cold, hungry days he had observed as Elias's disguised self, a permanent reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of compassion. Alastair Finch and Serafina Vance, on the other hand, had vanished from the glittering circles of corporate finance, their names now synonymous with disgrace. Elias Thorne, true to his word, had ensured their professional demise was complete, their fall from grace swift and absolute. Their names became whispered cautionary tales in boardrooms and trading floors, their reputations shattered beyond repair, a poison that clung to any potential opportunity. Alastair, unable to secure any meaningful employment in his accustomed field, eventually found himself struggling to make ends meet, reduced to taking odd jobs, a stark, humiliating contrast to his former life of privilege and power. Serafina, her public image ruined and her financial support gone, spiraled into a life of quiet despair, her once glamorous existence reduced to a bitter memory, a constant torment of what she had lost. They had learned, in the cruelest way possible, that the true cost of their avarice, their casual cruelty, was far greater than any perceived gain. Their world had crumbled because they had valued status and wealth over the fundamental dignity of another human being. Elias Thorne, watching the profound transformation of his company and finding deep solace in the peaceful contentment of Marius, finally found the serenity he had long sought. His immense wealth, once a source of his deepest disillusionment and a symbol of his isolation, now felt lighter, purer, as it was channeled towards genuine good, towards fostering a culture of compassion. He understood that true legacy was not built on towering profits or grand titles, but on the profound impact one had on the lives of others, on the hearts one touched. He had found his successor not in a boardroom, among the calculating and ambitious, but on the cold pavement outside his own building, in the quiet, unassuming heart of a man who extended kindness simply because it was the right thing to do. The true character of an individual, it becomes clear, is not revealed in the blinding light of prosperity or the flattering glow of power, but in the deepest shadows of adversity and the quiet moments of unobserved choice. For it is then, when stripped of pretense and the pursuit of personal gain, that the inherent goodness, or profound cruelty, of the human spirit truly shines through, stark and undeniable. And in a world often blinded by superficiality, the quiet, consistent act of kindness will always find its reward, proving that a compassionate heart is the greatest wealth of all. If this story resonated with you, where a man's disguise exposed the true nature of those around him, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next powerful narrative. We explore stories of resilience, unexpected twists, and life-changing lessons every week. Now, we want to hear from you in the comments below. What surprised you most about Elias Thorne's unconventional test? Do you believe kindness always finds its reward, even in the most unexpected ways? And if you were Elias, would you have chosen the same path to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.